goes to St Thomas's Church. She's been running Traidcraft there for some time. She's got a lot of experience and a lot to tell us. So we're really pleased, thank you, Maureen, for coming here today, for giving up your morning to come here and tell us so much more. Thank you so much.
Well, can you hear me? It's a real joy to be here with you, to share in this particular service, which is absolutely thoroughly enjoying your service, and you're welcome. And knowing that you are interested in Fairtrade, and I know already that you're an eco-church, and you've got your Fairtrade's Traidcraft stall, so well done. I'll hand over to you now, Maureen. Thank you. Thank you. Organised. No. Well, I've just said how lovely it is to be with you all and to share in this very special time of thanksgiving to God. Now, harvest is a long tradition going back well over 3,000 years, really. Having planted seeds, growth was weather dependent, so it was never certain just how much crop would be collected or gathered in. There was, and still is, a natural feeling of relief, of gratitude, when crops are gathered into the barn or collected up in whichever way they are these days. We've all seen the lovely sight of the harvested field, though most of us are far removed from the scene of production. Perhaps we need to remind ourselves that the land is all we have, and it keeps us alive. We may not be the ones looking after it. Others must do it for us. In our supermarkets, there are shelves full of selection. How often do we ask, where does it come from? Or, who produced it? And then, what are their challenges with the often powerful retailers? Perhaps the easiest sales are farmers' markets, directly between producer and consumer. There are no middlemen. An exchange is made. We can judge that it is a fair deal for both sides. It could be said to be transparent. Those businesses have become more multifaceted, international, and subject to government policies and complex supply chains, and far from transparent regarding responsibilities for welfare of either the workers who produce it or the environment. A poor man's field may produce abundant harvest, but injustice sweeps it away. That's a very, very ancient proverb. Now producers often need to comply with big retailers and all their demands. Even in the UK, milk prices are puzzlingly low. We buy gallons of it and told the price we pay barely covers the cost of production. Apparently, sourced elsewhere, it's cheaper, and UK dairy farmers are going out of business. It's hard to make sense of what's known as market forces. It doesn't seem fair, at least in this country, for those affected. We have regulations, support networks, free medical care and education. But many things we enjoy cannot be produced here. What would life be like without tea, coffee, bananas and chocolate? Then there are packets of tins labelled packed in the UK. So who produced all or part of the contents? How was it grown? How do producers in far-off places fare when they're sick? Or for children's education? Or after a bad harvest? Or when prices drop unexpectedly? Or when big company buyers suddenly find another cheaper source? And what about the environment? Cocoa workers in West Africa. Now, trade is complicated, and for sure, not all trade is fair. Even now, most of the farmers and workers at the beginning of the supply chain don't receive a fair share of the profit. This year, Fairtrade put a spotlight on the Ivory Coast, it is West Africa, the world's biggest cocoa producer. There, 4 million people grow cocoa, much of which comes to the UK, where we have where we love chocolate, and we eat so many bars between us, we eat the equivalent weight to 4,000 blue whales. It's a £4 billion a year business, and yet, shockingly, 60% of all Ivory Coast farmers live below the UN poverty line of just £1.47 a day. Fairtrade intends to enable consumers to put this right. So what I'm saying is that we have the chance, by choosing Fairtrade goods, to actually alter some part of this back in the supply chain. Now, back in 1979, poverty in underdeveloped countries was already recognised as being inextricably linked with international trade. And then the world coffee price collapsed, with a devastating effect on producer communities. From that disaster, organisations like Christian Aid, CAFOD and Oxfam declared that every worker requires a minimum living wage to support themselves and a family adequately. So the three basic needs were nutritious food all year, community improvements and education. Now, why do we need a fair trade organisation? Millions of people in the poor, rural producer areas have no option other than to earn a living through agriculture. There are no choices there. 75% of people in rural areas live on less than $1 a day. The price volatility is directly linked to poverty. And the poverty cycle is only broken when farmers receive a sustainable income and support for their communities. Now, that's been seen and proven time and time again. Now, fair trade works to ensure a fair deal for all producers. That is the objective. And now, at least, there are 1.7 million farmers or workers in the fair trade system in just 73 countries. So how does it work? Impoverished communities learn how fair trade works through various agencies of connection with fair trade and agree to work together as producer cooperatives while learning about protecting the environment. That's avoiding river pollution, protection of local forests and limiting the use of pesticides. They learn methods to improve their crops and ways to alleviate the effects of climate change. Farming ideas are transferred from other successful communities. They agree to share decision-making about the use of the fair trade premium. That's the additional payment to benefit the whole community. For example, used as a school, a clinic, or a water pump. They need to prepare together and learn about the system and the supply chains. To understand it better, they are assured of a 3-year commitment for sale of their products. Immediately, it brings a feeling of hope, replacing their despair. A new confidence spreads to everyone in the community, and they have to learn to work together, and they realise it can be done. Of course, there are standards which have to be kept, and it's not achieved overnight, and these standards have to be maintained, so they are checked by qualified auditors every 3 years. I'd like to show you how I've seen this work. Now, there are 4 slides there to show you one group in India. I went there some years ago with Traidcraft to meet tea producers, and I saw firsthand the difference that fair trade can make. Now, these people were not yet in the fair trade scheme. They live high in the Nilgiri Hills at nearly 6,000 feet, so it's very cold at night at certain times of the year. Tea leaves picked that morning, and they were waiting for collection. And waiting. Now, they have no transport. It's imperative that the leaves get to the factory quickly and before they deteriorate, before they lose their flavour. So the producers were dependent on a transport agent who will offer the price depending on what the going rate happens to be that day. They were hoping to join the Fairtrade scheme, and the men meet us to explain their daily yields and hopes of the future. So these are the men in the, I think it is, top right-hand corner. There are all the men of the community. There they are, gathered in a little hall. And on the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the men there. They were telling us about their daily yields and how they were hoping and what they've done so far, and the plans they were trying to make to get together. Now, the women were not very obvious at that stage, except for one. She was the only one we saw, first of all, and she was the one who spoke passionately about their need for a basic clinic in their community, which is how they plan to use the Fairtrade premium once they qualify for the scheme. So there they were, a pretty desperate community who knew they needed help, and the government agent locally had contacted the Fairtrade organisation, and they were hoping to be a part of it. Now, moving on to another part, some few hours of drive away, here was another group. Now, they were completely different. They were already part of the Fairtrade scheme. Their whole demeanour was different. They were obviously far more, there was much more equality in the community, and they had already established themselves and had actually qualified. Now, here there was a feeling of optimism. The women, those women on the left, they had just been to the school, they just arrived, they'd been to a PTA meeting. They were involved in the community, and they also had a water harvesting tank, so there was less time to spend collecting water from a stream. Now, between the tea bushes, they had, there they are, the same group, showing us their fields. They were showed us how they'd gathered from their one cow per family. They'd gathered the horn of one of the cows, which sounds terrible, but I believe you can cut cow horns quite here. I think it happens in this country. And they grind it up, and by carefully storing it and then taking it out, they're able to add it homeopathically, as it were, in water to their crops. And this helps to alleviate the difficulty they have with a certain beetle which eats the crop, a very destructive beetle. So they're able to get rid of that with this homeopathic method. So growing organically is not actually obligatory in Fairtrade, but people find that the more they care for the crops, the more they are enthused and encouraged, the more they want to look after the land better. And it happens as a matter of course. They were proud of their improvements and their greater yield. And now, you see, on the top right-hand side, they have their own truck. And that was enabled them to get their tea into the tea factory as early as possible. And there at the bottom right-hand side, you can see the tea along on a conveyor belt there. The tea is tipping along and going on towards the ovens, where it's very quickly heated and treated so that it has the very best of flavours. Meanwhile, the truck goes away and goes around into the rest of the community, collecting the milk churns from the people's cows. So it has a double use. It's benefiting the community in a whole variety of ways. And that's a basic way of how Fairtrade works and how much the Fairtrade can actually enthuse and encourage so that people are really empowered to look after the land and to look after themselves. So that label, or 4 of these labels here, you may see on things that you buy. The one on the bottom left-hand corner, of course, you recognise straight away, or I believe you would do. And it's the blue there represents the blue sky of potential, and the green, of course, is the green of growth. And that, the black in between, if you can imagine it, it's the raised arm to celebrate human endeavour. I hope that makes sense. People are always asking me, what does that label represent? And that's exactly how it is. Now the top left-hand corner label, Fair for Life, that's generally seen on artisanal products like cloth and pottery and basketry, those sorts of things. But it is a very much guaranteed fair trade. Liberation, you may well know from if you buy your Traidcraft peanuts, they are definitely Liberation. They're grown in Malawi, very conscientiously there. And then the bottom right-hand corner, People Tree, that is a clothing manufacturer. They were guaranteed fair trade many years ago and continue on to this day and are now joined by other clothing firms. So that's very much how the fair trade system is broadcast and how we can be sure of our goods. So fair trade gives consumers the chance to make a difference in the lives of producers in the developing world. You know probably that Traidcraft plc has been a not-for-profit trading company for 40 years. It's a Christian organisation underpinned with prayer and contributed towards setting up fair trade 25 years ago. Now, Traidcraft Exchange, that's the campaigning arm inspired by the principles of fair trade, and they run projects that use the power of trade to fight poverty and also campaign to make trade fairer for people in developing countries. Now, since the 2016 referendum, Traidcraft Exchange has, by invitation, been working with government planning groups to prepare for post-Brexit international trading. So that was a marvellous opportunity for them to make sure that underdeveloped countries are not overlooked. However, in this way, by becoming involved like this, they have become aware of ISDS, Interstate Dispute Settlement. Now, I have never heard anything like this before until a month or so back, and I wonder if any of you have. It's a shocking system where profit trumps everything, where the most powerful companies can challenge governments if they dare to put their people above the profits by using special ISDS courts. There is no time to say too much more about this here, but I have leaflets with me as I believe if you care about fair trading, you should probably want to know more. The governments, our government, is hoping to incorporate these courts into the system when they sort out the trading post-Brexit. So it's terribly important that we know about it. Fair trade has never been more important or urgent, and with your efforts here, at your Traidcraft stall and whatever you buy for your refreshments, and as you choose fair trade goods when shopping, you will be making a difference to producers to maintain a standard of living they justly deserve, and helping them to maintain the land they in turn care for. So it's a wonderful opportunity for us to actually support them in this way. And as Nelson Mandela said, I'll just leave you with this, overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity, it's an act of justice. While poverty persists, there is no true freedom.